I want to start today by tapping into a specific frustration, one that I think pretty much everyone listening has felt.
Okay, I'm with you.
It's that feeling you get when you look at a massive, dysfunctional organization. Maybe it's the government, maybe it's the corporation you work for, and you just see the chaos, the bad decisions, the drift.
The wasted money, it's a universal experience. You see the gears grinding and you just want to step in.
Exactly. And the fantasy we all have is the big fix. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah, the giant red button.
We want to walk into the control room, find that button labeled "Fix Everything," and just slam it. We want the sweeping reform, the thunderous speech.
The day one executive order that just wipes the slate clean. It's a very cinematic way of looking at the world.
It is. But today, we're going to, well, dismantle that fantasy.
Yeah.
We're doing a deep dive into a piece of analysis called The Mechanics of Parliamentary Momentum.
And the core argument is, it's going to be a little frustrating for the adrenaline junkies.
Yes, it is. Because the source suggests that if you really want to change how a massive system works, you have to stop looking at the headlines.
You have to stop looking for the big switch. The source argues that we're all sort of obsessed with the wrong things. We focus on personalities, on politics.
Right.
But the actual behavior of the system, what decides if a law is good or bad, is determined by this machinery that's just humming away in the background.
And when we say machinery, we're not talking about like AI or robots. We are talking about the boring stuff.
The incredibly boring stuff.
Yeah.
We are talking about calendars, the physics of reading time. We're talking about how many months a person actually sits in a specific chair before they move on.
It sounds so mundane, almost trivial. But as I was reading through this, it became so clear that these invisible mechanics are basically the silent dictators of policy.
They really are.
So, welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're going to look under the hood of Parliament, and really any complex bureaucracy, to find the gears that actually turn the machine.
And the promise here is that once you see this stuff, you really can't unsee it. You'll start spotting it in your own workplace almost immediately.
So let's start with that opening salvo from the source, this idea of thinking smaller. Now, I have to push back on this a little bit.
Go for it.
Because usually when someone tells me to think small, they mean lower your standards. Is the source saying we should just give up on ambitious change?
Not at all. And this is a really crucial distinction the analysis makes right up front. There's a huge difference between being smaller in ambition and being smaller in scale.
Okay, explain that.
The source argues that we're addicted to the bits of the system that make speeches about themselves.
The press conferences, the debates, the viral clips.
Precisely. Those are the things that signal ambition to us. But while we're all watching the speech, the actual behavior of the institution is being dictated by these totally silent variables.
So to be ambitious about the outcome, you have to be obsessive about the scale of the mechanics.
You got it.
Okay, so let's get specific. What are these silent variables? Give me the laundry list.
It's a list of logistics that sounds like it belongs in an HR manual, honestly.
Right.
How is the parliamentary calendar laid out? How many weeks are we in session versus recess?
Okay.
When, and I mean literally what time of day can you ask questions in a committee? And maybe the most critical one,
Let me guess. Who has time to read?
who actually has the time to read the material before a decision is made?
That one feels like it explains about, 80% of corporate failures, let alone
Yeah.
political ones. But why is that a mechanic and not just, personal laziness?
Because it's structural. We often assume that if a bad bill passes, it's because the people voting had bad intentions.
Well, they were corrupt or something.
Right. But the mechanics suggest a simpler and frankly more terrifying explanation. The schedule physically did not allow the time needed to understand the bill's complexity.
So, okay, I'm an MP. I get a 500-page document on environmental regulations at 8 in the morning. The vote's at 10.
You physically cannot read it. It is impossible.
So my decision can't be based on the actual content.
Correct. It
Yeah.
defaults to something else. Party loyalty. A gut feeling. Or just following the person next to you because you assume they know what's going on.
And they probably don't because they got the same email at 8 a.m.
Exactly. The source puts it so well. Once you notice these mechanics, it becomes harder to ignore how much weight they're carrying. The calendar isn't just a schedule. It's a filter for quality.
And if the filter's clogged, quality drops, no matter how smart the people are.
No matter how smart.
So let's play this out. What happens when these gears grind against each other? The calendar's too tight, reading time is 0. Or what's the result? My instinct is to look for, like, a big crash.
A government shutdown or a project exploding.
Yeah. does that happen?
That's the insidious part, and this is where it really clicked for me. The source says the strain rarely looks like an explosion. It doesn't look like a crash.
So what does it look like?
It looks like a pervasive sense of hurry.
Hurry. That is disturbingly relatable.
It is the defining characteristic of a dysfunctional system. The symptoms are so vivid, work starts stacking up, complex issues get pushed to later meetings.
Meetings that may or may not ever happen.
Exactly. And the phrase the text uses is, nothing breaks outright, it just never quite settles.
It never quite settles. That's a haunting description of modern work life. It's that feeling of just constantly treading water, never solving the root cause.
And that's where we get to the mechanics of momentum. When a system is always in this state of compressed time, this hurry, it has to compensate. It shortcuts the process.
It stops relying on evidence because evidence takes time.
Right. Instead, it just leans on momentum. It does whatever fits the shape of the day.
The shape of the day. I paused on that phrase. It implies we're not passing a law because it's the best law for the next decade.
We're passing it because we need to get to lunch.
Or there's a press briefing at 2, and this is just the path of least resistance.
The pressure isn't some villain. The pressure is the schedule itself. The system adapts to survive the calendar, often at the cost of the outcome.
This leads us right into a topic that usually makes people's eyes glaze over. Scrutiny.
Yeah. Not the sexiest word.
It is not. But let's define it for this deep dive. Scrutiny isn't just checking work. It's the quality control mechanism. It's the moment someone asks, does this actually work?
And the source argues that the timing of that question is actually more important than the who.
Okay, so in most systems, business or government, scrutiny is pushed to the very end of the line, right?
Almost always.
You build the thing, polish the draft, and then right before you launch, you have the review phase. I mean, that seems logical. You check the work when it's done.
It seems logical, but the source says it's a disaster for human behavior. Think about the psychology of that moment. By the end of the process, what's happened to the people involved?
Well, I spent 6 months on it. I've staked my reputation on it. I've told my boss it's going to be great.
Exactly. Positions have hardened, options have narrowed. So if I come to you at the very end and point out a major flaw, even if I'm 100% right, what does that feel like?
It feels like an ambush. It feels like you're trying to tank my project at the finish line, not like you're helping.
And the source says, changing course looks less like learning and more like losing face. That's the key insight. Late scrutiny forces everyone into a defensive crouch.
So it's not about the evidence anymore.
No, it's about anticipation. You're just trying to survive the critique so you can get the stamp of approval and move on. The goal becomes winning the argument, not fixing the policy.
Okay, so what's the alternative? We can't just not check things.
You shift the work slightly earlier. It sounds so trivial, but the source says moving scrutiny upstream changes the texture of the disagreement.
The texture. What does that look like in practice?
Well, if scrutiny happens early, before the press release is written, before you've promised anything to the public, a question is just a question.
It's not an attack.
Right. There's still room to explore trade-offs. You can say, hey, this part might not work, and I can hear that as, ooh, good catch, let's adjust, instead of you are trying to destroy me.
It separates the problem from the person's ego.
It does. It allows questions to be raised before anyone's credibility is tied to the result. And it's not that people suddenly become better, more moral actors.
Right. We haven't invented a pill that suppresses hubris.
No, you've just moved the meeting from Friday to Tuesday. You change the when, and you change the incentives.
That's weirdly hopeful. Because changing human nature is impossible. But changing a calendar invite, that's actually doable.
It's doable. But there's always a but. It requires fighting another really popular instinct, and that's the part of the deep dive that's about the workforce itself, the myth of fresh eyes.
Oh, this is a big one. Every election, every corporate restructure, we hear it. We need new blood, clean house.
Fresh energy to shake things up, and the source acknowledges there's some truth to that. Stagnation is bad.
Sure.
But the analysis warns there's a tipping point where turnover becomes toxic.
And what happens when we turn over rules too quickly? What's the cost of constant fresh eyes?
The system forgets faster than it learns.
That's a strong line.
Yeah.
Forgets faster than it learns.
Think about it. A new minister, a new VP. They arrive, they have energy, but they don't even know where the bathroom is, let alone how the budget works or why the last 3 attempts at the same policy failed.
Right. So they spend the first 6 months just rediscovering all the constraints their predecessor already knew.
They're just hitting walls that someone else already mapped out. And then, Just as they're starting to get it, just as they become competent,
It's time to rotate, or the government changes.
or even worse, they start preparing to leave. The source points out this fascinating dynamic where, in the later months of a short tenure, the incentive shifts to just avoiding blame for outcomes they didn't fully shape.
So you get this beginner phase where they're clueless, and a lame duck phase where they're just protecting their career.
Which leaves almost zero time in the middle for actual competent governing, and the cost of all that churn is the loss of institutional memory.
Now, institutional memory is a term that sounds like a dusty filing cabinet. Why should we care about it?
Because without it, you're trapped in a loop. Institutional memory isn't just files, it's pattern recognition. It's having people around who can say, we tried this 5 years ago, and it failed because the tech wasn't ready.
Instead of saying, I have a brilliant new idea, when it's actually the same bad idea from 5 years ago that nobody remembers.
Exactly. Mistakes don't have to be relearned from scratch every 2 years.
It's like the movie Groundhog Day.
Yeah.
But nobody realizes they're in the time loop.
That's a perfect analogy. The system is trapped, constantly reacting to a new crisis that's really just an old one in a different hat.
Okay, so let's try to put this together. We have these three main mechanics. Better calendars to reduce the hurry.
Yep.
Earlier scrutiny, so we don't trigger defensiveness. And longer tenure, so we actually have some memory. I'm a practical person. I want to make a checklist.
And the source explicitly stops you right there. It says, this is not a checklist.
Why not? Checklists get things done.
Because these things don't work in isolation. The concept is alignment. If you only fix one, you might actually make things worse.
How? Give me an example of a mismatch.
Okay, imagine you just fix the calendar. You give everyone 2 full weeks to read every bill, but you still have super high turnover. Everyone is new.
Right. So now people have plenty of time to read, but they still have no idea what they're looking at. They lack all context. The time is wasted.
Totally wasted. Or flip it. You fix tenure, people stay for 10 years, but scrutiny is still pushed to the very end.
Then you just have really experienced veteran people getting really defensive and digging in their heels to protect their legacy projects.
Exactly. You've just entrenched the bad ideas with more experienced defenders. The source argues these changes have to work together as an ecosystem.
It's like a three-legged stool. If you saw off one leg, the whole thing falls over.
It is. And when you align these boring mechanics, time, tenure, scrutiny, you get the ultimate payoff. And this, for me, is the core line of the entire analysis.
Hit me with it.
You create a system that starts quietly penalizing its own better instincts.
Stops quietly penalizing its own better instincts. I want to linger on that because it implies the good instincts are already there.
Yes, and this is a surprisingly compassionate view of bureaucracy. It assumes that most people in the system, politicians, civil servants, middle managers, they aren't villains.
They want to do a good job.
They want to read the bill, they want to catch the mistake, they want to solve the problem.
But the mechanics, the hurry, the late scrutiny, the churn, they punish you for trying.
Right. If you raise your hand in that late meeting, you're the bad guy slowing things down. If you spend time reading details instead of networking, you fall behind. The system is rigged against quality.
And alignment unrigs it. But the tricky part, as the source notes, is that you can't really cut a ribbon for this kind of reform.
No. There's no mission accomplished banner for we improved our calendar strategy.
Congratulations, everyone. We have slightly better institutional memory. The crowd goes mild.
It doesn't get you votes. It doesn't get you a headline. The change is subtle. It arrives unevenly. There's no single moment where one person can claim credit.
Which is probably why it's so rarely done. It's the paradox of good management. If you do it right, nobody notices because things just work.
Things simply don't break. The hurry subsides. The panic decreases.
So we've gone from looking for explosions to analyzing clocks. We've learned hurry is the enemy of quality, that slowing churn helps an organization remember its own lessons.
And that these aren't separate fixes, but a web of incentives that have to be aligned.
I think for the listener, the big takeaway is to become a mechanic of your own environment. Whether it's your government, your company,
or your local school board, don't just look at the speeches, look at the structure.
Ask, when does the scrutiny happen?
Exactly. Ask, are we in a hurry because of a real crisis or because we designed the day badly? Make sure the unglamorous stuff isn't undermining the outcomes you say you want.
Now, before we wrap, the source leaves us with a kind of warning for the future. It pivots to what happens when we fail to fix these mechanics.
Yes, this is the darker side. Once you understand this internal hurry, You start to see something else happening in modern organizations. You see delegation.
Explain what that means in this context.
Well, if Parliament or the board feels too chaotic to think long term, it starts pushing responsibility outside. It creates arm's-length bodies, independent commissions.
Oh, climate change is too complex for our schedule. Let's set up an independent committee to handle it.
Exactly. And on the surface, that sounds responsible. It sounds like you're bringing in experts.
It implies stability.
It can be. But the source asks a really provocative question. Is this creating actual stability? Or is it just a way to absorb pressure?
Like a shock absorber on a car.
Exactly. If the core institution is broken and it just keeps outsourcing the thinking to other bodies, eventually you have to ask, what is Parliament actually for?
Is it leading, or is it just hollowed out? And what happens to those outside bodies?
The source warns that under the wrong incentives, they just turn into blame magnets. They exist to catch the heat so the politicians don't have to. And that's not a solution.
That's just hiding the mess in a different room.
That's the fear. We might be building a labyrinth of committees just to escape the fact that we can't manage our own calendar.
Well, that's a thought that is going to keep me up at night. But at least now when I see a bad decision, I'll know to look at the clock before I blame the person.
It's a start.
Thank you all for taking this deep dive with us. We hope you'll look at the boring stuff a little differently from now on.
Keep watching the mechanics.
See you next time.